will build a close, cooperative future relationship with the EU, not as members but as partners. I'm a scientist by trade, and EU membership has actually been beneficial for science and scientific research. A Labour government will seek to ensure that the UK maintains our leading research role by staying part of something called Horizon 2020, which has brought a lot of funding for UK science from the European Union. We'll also seek to maintain membership of Euratom, which is something where we collaborate on nuclear issues, and also the European Medicines Agency. And also speaking with my university lecturer hat on, we'd like to remain part of the Erasmus scheme that allows British students opportunities to go and study in EU countries and reciprocal rights for EU students to come here. We'll also ensure that there's no hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and also no change in the status or sovereignty of Gibraltar. And finally, we will drop the Tories' Great Repeal Bill and replace it with an EU rights and protections bill that will protect workers' rights, protect equality law, consumer rights, and environmental protections.
And finally to Philip, this question.
Well, I voted to leave in the referendum. The Shipley constituency voted to leave, and the Bradford district voted to leave, about all of which I'm delighted. People talking about soft Brexit and hard Brexit. These were terms that were never invented before the referendum actually took place. During the referendum campaign, none of you here will be able to recall any talk of soft Brexits and hard Brexits. These were invented terms after the referendum by people who lost the referendum, who wanted to overturn the result of the referendum, like our friends in the Liberal Democrats, who still insist on using the word Democrats in their name, despite the fact that they are wanting to overturn the result of the referendum. It was the question. Because what people are saying, we've had three other candidates here tonight saying that they want to stay in the single market, that that's their future vision of being in the EU. Well, staying in the single market means these things. It means you have to accept free movement of people. It means you have to keep paying £10 billion a year net into the EU budget. And it means that you have to have laws decided in Brussels rather than Westminster. It in effect means that you don't leave the EU at all. So when these candidates say that they want us to stay in the single market, but they respect the results of the referendum, they don't respect the results of the referendum. They are using an underhand way to try and keep us in the European Union and overturn the things that people voted for, which was the end of free movement of people, stop paying £10 billion a year net into the EU budget, and laws being made, people wanting laws made in Westminster rather than Brussels. And they are the red lines that the government have made clear in the negotiations that they will not accept that, and that's why we cannot be in the single market if we leave the EU. That's just an honest position that people need to be aware of. So of course we want to protect the rights of people who are already here. They will be protected, but we want to do so in a way that protects the rights of British citizens living in other EU countries. Theresa May asked for that deal to be, that reciprocal agreement to be done before the start of the formal negotiations. Unfortunately, the EU refused that request, but that will be something that the Prime Minister will take forward at an early stage of the formal negotiations. Sophie said that we're in a very weak position with our negotiations. I mean, what we want is free trade with the EU. That's what we want. That's what lots of people thought they were voting for back in 1975 in that referendum. We want free trade.
So you just say what the difference is between a hard Brexit and a soft Brexit, and what Brexit you're in favour of?
Well, I suppose you'd call the Labour Party approach a soft Brexit. You know, we don't want to leave the European Union without a trade deal, unlike the Conservatives, which have threatened to leave without a deal. You know, we wouldn't walk away without a deal. So our approach would be to sort of have a Brexit that would protect jobs and the economy in this country.
But, I mean, the Conservatives say they want a trade deal. and they're prepared to accept WTO rules, but they're pursuing a trade deal. So is there a different approach that Labour's taking to a trade deal? Is there any principles in negotiation you're not prepared to accept? What is the difference in terms of your approach to a trade deal?
I think the difference is that we see no deal as a bad deal. I mean, it would be a terribly bad deal for, particularly manufacturers and exporters in this country. So we wouldn't walk away without a deal. What we would do, if we can't get a deal within the sort of 2-year Article 50 kind of negotiation period, then we'd be looking for transitional arrangements until we get a deal that's acceptable to both sides.
Why wouldn't you be able to get a deal? What is involved in getting a deal?
Well, it's an incredibly difficult process to extract ourselves from the European Union, which we've been part of for the last sort of 40 years. So, and the time frame to do that is very short. It's going to be actually less than 2 years, effectively probably 1.5 years, because we'll probably have to wait till Angela Merkel's election in Germany, I think it's in the autumn. So there's a lot to do within 2 years, and we don't want to walk the country off a cliff edge. So what we're proposing is, if it's not possible to reach a deal in that time, then we would go for these transition arrangements after the 2-year Article 50 time frame.
But why wouldn't it be possible to achieve a deal? What deal do you want?
So basically, what deal that we want is we want to have access to the single market. So we don't. So our approach in the negotiations would be to sort of try and have more of a cooperative approach compared to Theresa May's sort of confrontational approach, really, sort of a bloody difficult woman approach. So our approach would be, we'd start off by allowing EU citizens to stay in the country, and I think that would actually create some sort of goodwill amongst leaders in the EU states, in other EU states. So I think we'd get off on a good footing there. I do think it will be possible to get a deal. We'll certainly try to get a deal within the 2-year time frame. And I think our sort of viewpoint would be that we try and maintain the benefits of EU membership. So personally, in my day job, I work as a scientist. We would sort of try and stay part of the EU funding arrangements for science and research, because it's been tremendously beneficial for us. We'd also try and stay part of the security arrangement, so stay part of Europol, which is the network of police forces across Europe. So I think our approach would generally be to try and maintain as many benefits of European Union membership as possible, but whilst not actually being members, we would be partners rather than members of the EU.
So what is a hard Brexit?
I think, to my mind, a hard Brexit would be, leaving without any trade deal and going back on World Trade Organization rules. I think that would be the kind of ultimate hard Brexit. There might be sort of different sort of grades of hardness sort of in between that and what we're proposing.
But those objectives you mentioned don't seem to be different to the Conservative approach. In terms of the objective to have EU citizens remaining in the UK, the objective to cooperate in educational and research institutions, and the objective to get a beneficial trade agreement. So, is there a difference in your objectives?
No, there are differences in our objectives. Theresa May gave that speech, I think it was back in March, on what the Conservatives' aims were in Brexit. Our aims are different. She didn't actually commit to allowing EU citizens to stay in this country. She wouldn't do that. she's actually proposing to kind of use those as part of as like a bargaining chip in the Brexit negotiations.
But that's just a tactical difference. I mean, in terms of the objectives, it's the same objectives. When you mentioned Theresa May's speech, was there anything particular in the speech that you have a different approach to, different objectives in terms of?
I think in terms of her speech, what I'm concerned about is that she will actually see us pulling out of Europe as a chance to get rid of what I see as benefits of our EU membership. I'm worried that she will actually see them as kind of like red tape and regulation on Britain and British industry, and actually use it as an excuse to get rid of those. So to get rid of some of the environmental protections that come with EU membership, to get rid of some of the employment protections that come with EU membership. You know, she's in embracing Brexit. She's kind of cozied up to the sort of right wing of the Conservative Party, and those people, you know, they've always disliked the European Union, and they dislike what they see as like Euro kind of red tape. You know, their view would be to kind of have a bonfire of all this red tape. And we will actually be fighting against that.
But those are domestic decisions. I mean, the objective of the Conservatives is to bring those EU laws and regulations under domestic jurisdiction, and then so we can decide for ourselves what laws and regulations to either agree with or discard. Is your approach different to that? I mean, do you accept the principle that we should be making our own decisions when it comes to laws and regulations and not officials in Brussels?
Well, I think the Conservatives have got to recognise that although a majority of people voted to leave the EU, there was a large group of people that voted to remain. 48% voted to remain, and actually the Conservative Party. Well, I mean, we've got the general election on Thursday. We don't know what the composition of the House of Commons is going to be. If Theresa May gets what she wants, and I hope she doesn't, having a much larger group of Conservative MPs, most of those are actually hard Brexiteers. And what I would sort of say to the British people is, don't give Theresa May, a blank cheque, because actually that's what she wants. Vote for as many opposition MPs, and obviously I'd be encouraging people to vote for Labour MPs, so that we'll actually hold the government to account. We won't be giving Theresa May a blank cheque. We'll be ensuring that the benefits of EU membership are actually retained, and she isn't sort of. She doesn't follow the lead of the hard right of the Conservative Party, and in getting rid of those, which would actually be damaging to the workers in this country and damaging to our environment.
But I'm still not clear about the difference in the approach, because the Conservatives have stressed that getting a trade agreement is the key to a good economic relationship with the EU. They don't favour going back to WTO rules. They see that as just a fallback if the EU is not willing to allow a trade agreement without making concessions on sovereignty. Has Labour got a different approach in terms of securing a trade agreement?
Well, actually, I don't think we have had the details of the Conservative approach. I mean, all that they've really said is that they want to have a trade agreement, but they'd be willing to walk away without one. Our main difference is that we wouldn't be willing to walk away without one. I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert on all the likely negotiations that are likely to go on in the EU negotiations. I'm not a member of the sort of shadow cabinet team on Brexit. All I can tell you is what's in the Labour Party manifesto.
Okay, but just to push you on this, because the Conservatives have mentioned there's 4 sort of red lines in the negotiations that would mean that they were effectively forced to walk away by the EU negotiations. One is control over money, one is control over trade policy, one is control over laws, and one is control over borders. So, do you differ on any of those?
Well, we accept that the free movement of people will come to an end as we leave the EU. But the other things would be up for negotiation in the EU negotiations.
So in terms of laws, you're not prepared to draw a red line under having no EU laws influencing the UK?
Well, I mean, in terms of getting access to the free market, there are standards, EU standards across the EU. For widgets and things like that. I'm not going to go into details on things, but there are standards, and so in order for us to maintain access to the single market, we might have to accept, keeping those standards. That's just one example.
Would you not think that's a betrayal of the constituents who voted leave? Because the main principle that people voted leave was that we could make our own laws domestically and be free and independent from officials and judges in Brussels deciding things for us.
No, I don't. And as I said, these things are open for negotiation.
But does that mean that sovereignty and the principles of us making our own decisions is open to negotiations?
No, because basically we will. The law that took us into the European Union, I think it was called the European Communities Act, that will basically be repealed. And we're actually not going to go along with the Conservatives' Great Repeal Act. We'll introduce our own version of a repeal act, and in that we'll actually be putting forward protections. And our main aim would be to maintain the protections on workers and the environment that we currently get with membership of the EU. And that, you won't see that in the Conservative Party manifesto.
Okay, so in terms of laws, you're prepared to make concessions. What about in terms of trade policy? Because being a member of the single market and a member of the customs union means that we're not free to determine our own trade policy. We have to abide by the EU trade policy. What's Labour's approach to trade?
Well, we do want to be able to negotiate our own deals with other countries. And that will be something that we will be seeking to be able to do in our negotiations with other EU countries.
So is that the same approach as the Conservatives?
The Conservatives say that they want to have deals with other countries, but I'm sure that there is some sort of compromise that we can reach with the EU, because, as I said, our aim is to get access to the single market. We think that's important for jobs and our economy.
I mean, in terms of the customs union, would you be prepared to be a member of the customs union? The Labour Party manifesto is that we might have some sort of associate membership of the customs union. There are issues around, for example, Northern Ireland. We don't want to go back to having a hard border there. And so, there will be issues and probably some compromises that need to be made along the way. Okay. And in terms of the membership of the single market, is it Labour policy not to be a member or to be a member of the single market?
Yeah, I think our aim is not actually to be a member of the single market, but to have access to the single market, because we don't agree that free movement of people should come to an end. I think that was one of the reasons why people did vote to leave the EU, is that they weren't happy with the sort of unrestricted free movement of people. So we accept that will come to an end as we leave the EU.
But the main reason people voted was over the issue of sovereignty. And do you share do you accept that the principle of sovereignty was the main reason? And what's your view on that?
No, I'm not sure actually. I think people voted for different reasons. I mean, for many different reasons. People from different political backgrounds. We saw, Labour Party supporters who in some parts of the country voted to leave. People across the south of England generally voted to leave. It was generally people in the large cities that voted to remain. I can't remember what your question was there.
Well, over sovereignty, some people, there's various polls that have been conducted. Lord Ashcroft's polls, I think, discovered that 49% of people voted leave, voted on the principle of sovereignty, 33% voted over migration. So it's a little bit strange to draw a red line under the sort of borders of migration rather than a red line under the principle of making our own laws and sovereignty, given that the emphasis of the Leave vote was sovereignty.
As we pull out of the European Union, and we accept that we'll be pulling out of the European Union, by definition, that means that we will gain some sovereignty, because by being members of the European Union, we actually pulled some of our sovereignty. As we pull out, we will actually get some of that back, because we won't be pulling our sovereignty anymore.
Some of it, or all of it?
Well, I said there are things that are open to negotiations. By and large, we will regain all of our sovereignty, but I think there are some things where we might need to compromise on.
Okay, and finally, the area of money. What is your view of the amount of money that you're prepared to put into the EU and the amount of degree of control that the EU can exercise over any money that we give to the EU?
I think it would be, the Labour Party is a party of fairness. I think it would be an issue of fairness. We'll pay for things that we're on the hook for, that we've signed up for, and that we get benefits from, but we won't pay for things that we don't get any benefits from. There are some things that we've signed up for, such as putting money into funding science in the Horizon 2020 programme. If we're going to stay part of that programme, then we would expect to keep on putting money into it. Also in things like the Europol, the police network, we'd like to stay members of that, and we will be prepared to put money into it. But for things that we're not a part of, we won't be. One of the most expensive things in the European Union is the Common Agricultural Policy. The Common Agricultural Policy has been largely for subsidising small farmers on the continent, small French farmers. We won't be part of that, and so actually we'll be getting a lot of money back in that way.
Okay, great. And just finally, the general election has been called on the basis of Brexit. Are you satisfied that there's been sufficient discussion about Brexit and the differences between the political parties? Because I'm asking these questions because I'm personally struggling to really understand what the difference is. And I'm also surprised that it hasn't been emphasised as much in the course of the election, given the fact that it was supposed to be an incredibly important issue.
Yeah. No, well, when the election was called, I thought it was going to be the kind of Brexit election, but actually it's like ordinary people that have made it not really the Brexit election. When we've been going around knocking on doors, I've been surprised how little Brexit comes up on the doorstep. Actually, what sort of comes up is, people sort of feel that they haven't had a pay rise for a long time, that things are getting expensive, the sort of cost of living is increasing. They're worried about the NHS, funding to the NHS. They're concerned about cuts to local schools. So it's actually been sort of domestic issues rather than Brexit that have come up, and that has surprised me. But actually, I suppose I'm pleased about that, because I think Labour have got a good message on all of those domestic issues.
So it's not because Labour hasn't got a vision of Brexit that it's wanting to put forward?
No, we have got a vision of Brexit we want to put forward, and it's what I said, which is we want to, try and retain the benefits of EU membership, but whilst accepting the result of the EU referendum that will be leaving the EU.